Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and in my previous video I broke down the beliefs of a part-time doctor, part-time writer, and full-time conspiracy theorist into science fact, science fiction, and pure science fantasy. I don't spend a lot of time debunking conspiracy theories, but this one in particular pissed me off because of the way that it just misrepresents what we do know about these fields, and what marvelous promise they might bring. At least in part, her claims were annoying to me because I'm an armchair transhumanist, and I believe that it's possible for us to reach a state of near immortality by the year 2050. And according to an essay I wrote back in 2010 when I was in college trying to imagine that future scenario, we're actually a few years ahead of schedule on 2 out of 4 key breakthroughs. The essay starts its predictions in 2020 and hypothesized what might happen once those predictions begin to build on one another. And on January 1st of this year, I released a video showing how we were ahead of the schedule on the first part of my predictions, which was a neural interface, like the ones the company Neuralink started working on back in 2016. It's already almost the end of 2020, and it looks like in the beginning of 2021, we're going to be testing on a global scale the second technology that I mentioned as being crucial in that essay. And that will be what I then termed viral medicine. This was an early attempt at describing manufactured genetics which could be inserted into the body to produce the same result as many mass-produced medicines do today. On the timeline of the potential scientific breakthroughs that I laid out in that essay, it seems to me that something like a global RNA vaccine would probably take place somewhere between 2026 and 2030. A potential reason this part of my prediction may be ahead of schedule because back in 2010, there would still be 6 more years before we would begin using CRISPR in the lab. This was a much bigger breakthrough than I gave it credit for even earlier this year. CRISPR was already doing what I was describing as viral medicine as early as maybe 2016 or 2017 on a very small scale. Though it's ironic that I missed the mark in calling it viral medicine, as CRISPR operates on an enzyme discovered within a bacteria. Before we get too far into what this advance could do for science in the long term, first, let's get an understanding of what this breakthrough does for modern vaccine technology. What is a vaccine, and how do they work? At their most basic, early vaccines work by injecting a small amount of an infectious material into the body in order to give the immune system enough information to give the body a fighting chance if it faces off against the contagion in the future. On the individual level, this is considered immunity. We don't talk about immunity in the same way on the societal level. For societies, we talk about herd immunity, and that is a concept that is currently misunderstood, and detangling that understanding requires understanding of another concept called an R0 value. In the last year, you probably heard the term herd immunity uttered by some mouth-breathing, ancient, work-from-home Republican in the context of saying, let's let this virus rip through our population so we can develop herd immunity, and that the old people should be happy to be able to die as a sacrifice.
When people say something like herd immunity, just let everyone get it, that's dumb. That's not how that works. I'm sorry, it's just not. And it kind of throws potentially millions of people under the bus of death. And you call yourself a moral person. Guy on Twitter says like, oh, just let all the old people die. This is why social media is a bad thing.
Waiting for a vaccine doesn't mean we abandon herd immunity, but that we get there the safest way we can, so that grandma has the best chance of getting through this with you. That's where R0 values come in.
Hey there. In this video, we're going to simulate some different versions of an infectious disease to try to get a handle on the basics.
An R0 value is a measure of a virus's infectiousness, where an R0 value of 1 means that an infected user will, on average, infect only one person before they are no longer contagious. At least in the short term, this would indicate a flat curve.
We need to send a letter to the mayor about washing our hands before we eat. Hey, cells vote, man. Cells vote.
The highly contagious virus, like COVID-19, for example, has a higher R0 value of approximately 2.5.
Holy spit. Careful.
and contagious. Ow.
Public health scientists are trying to figure out how to lower that effective value by using things like social distancing and mask wearing to try to decrease the chances that a single infected person will successfully be able to pass the virus along to multiple people. Strategically, our preferred way of getting a low R value and herd immunity is to vaccinate the population. If a population has zero immune resistance to a virus, with an R0 of 1.4, then giving even half of the population a vaccine, we could reduce the R value to as low as 0.7, which would result in a declining curve that would lead us to a point where we could eradicate the virus once and for all.
When R is above 1, the epidemic is still growing. When it's equal to 1, the number of active cases stops growing, and when it's less than 1, the cases decline. And when this fraction of susceptibles is small enough for R to go to 1, it's called herd immunity, which we'll talk more about later. But one thing we should note now, herd immunity means the number of cases will start dropping, but it's not an absolute cap.
One breakthrough that made vaccines a lot safer was breakthroughs in basically being able to sterilize or partially destroy viruses before they were injected into people. Depending on the virus or contagion at hand, this may require any number of different methods. And when you hear people complaining about heavy metals being in vaccines, know that they are being put in there just despite people getting vaccines, because those heavy metals were a part of the way that they deactivated the virus, and they just couldn't remove all of the trace elements. So just keep that in mind. A little bit of heavy metal isn't nearly as dangerous as a live vaccination would have been. But they're still less than perfect, because in the immediate term it does introduce harmful chemicals into the body, and scientists don't always do a 100% good job in killing the virus before loading it into the vaccine, which means that this can, again, still get certain people sick, which is why modern deactivated vaccines are still not given to people with weak immune systems.
Now we can see a little bit more clearly why infectious diseases don't go away on their own. At first, there's this initial epidemic with R greater than 1, just like before, and then, again, we get to a point where R is less than 1, leading to a decline. But this time, the infection count doesn't decline all the way to 0. Once it gets low, the number of susceptible blobs starts increasing again, and in turn, R climbs back above 1, and then the number of infections starts to rise again. There's an equilibrium here, with R always getting pulled back toward 1.
But what if there was a way to insert a recipe into the body so that it would use its own processes to manufacture a protein that was a part of the virus, so that the body's immune system could build an immunity while never being at risk of being exposed to the full virus?
It's really amazing. Most vaccines, I think, go through a development period of like 5 years. This is 10 months. That's nuts. And it's that one silver lining where, you know, for how many things have gone wrong in 2020, we know that science still works. We can come together, we can do the science, and we can help solve grand public health problems. The Moderna vaccine is taking bits of mRNA, which is messenger RNA, and RNA is 1/2 of the double helix strip of DNA. So we take that out, and this messenger RNA codes for proteins. That's what it does in the body. But in this case, what the mRNA inside of these vaccines is coding for are these spike proteins. So on the COVID-2 here, COVID virus, it uses proteins on the outside of this virus to attach into and then infiltrate human cells. Once it's inside those human cells, it uses its own genetic code to replicate itself. But you see how the science is being tricky here? We're saying, well, instead of waiting for that to happen and for your body to be completely infected, let's just make these proteins so that if we produce those proteins in your body, your immune system will go, hey, let me see some ID. And then it will start remembering those proteins. It'll start creating antibodies, which is kind of like this dictionary of, oh yeah, that's bad, we should kill that. Oh yeah. So we're getting around being infected by COVID by giving our bodies kind of like the calling card of COVID. So once the vaccine does this, our bodies will be primed so that the next time an actual virus tries to infect our cells, the body's like, oh, wait a second there, buddy. I saw your ID before. Definitely fake. You look like you're 10, not 31. What's really exciting about these is that in recent human testing, which is far down along the testing chain, there's a lot of other things you got to do first before you start injecting humans with stuff, because that's dangerous. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are 95 and 90% effective, respectively, is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives saved, if not millions. So it's very, very promising. And the human trials that have gone on so far have included as well high-risk people at very high risk for getting and succumbing to COVID-19. So with studies like that in pocket, we can feel very confident that a vaccine like this will be effective and save a lot of lives. And for each company, they're planning on rolling out about 1 billion doses each. It's going to take just a lot of, a staggering amount of coordination and logistics to make that happen. And that is all complicated by the fact, you may have read this in the news too, which is why the incoming administration in America is stressing the outgoing administration like, look, you need a plan for this because this is going to get complicated. Vaccines like this need what they call cold chains. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines need to be cooled down to up to negative 70 degrees Celsius. The Moderna one is much better in this regard, about negative 20 degrees Celsius, but that is very, very, very cold. And so when you think about the logistics on top of just the distribution, now everything has to be chilled with special equipment, special cooling trucks and containers and all this stuff. Everything gets really, really complicated.
The necessity of a cold chain only exists for RNA vaccines, so advances in DNA vaccines could make mass production more feasible. But there's a third major vaccine on the market, and it fits what I described in my essay. Developed by researchers at the University of Oxford, the vaccine uses an adenovirus that typically causes colds in chimpanzees. They genetically altered the virus so that it carried a gene for the coronavirus protein, which would theoretically train a person's immune system to be able to recognize the real coronavirus. Adenovirus-based vaccines are also being tested by Johnson & Johnson, as well as in labs in China, Italy, and elsewhere. An adenovirus-based vaccine, Sputnik V, is already being distributed in Russia on an emergency basis, although researchers have yet to release detailed results from their late-stage trial. None of these adenovirus-based vaccines seem to be as effective as the RNA vaccines, though. All three vaccine candidates appear to be highly effective against COVID-19, the research teams say. Pfizer and BioNTech say their vaccine has an efficacy of 95% against COVID-19, meaning 95% of people who received the vaccine were protected against the disease. Moderna reported that its product was 94.5% effective. Oxford and AstraZeneca reported that theirs was 62% effective in one dosing regimen and 90% effective in another, averaging 70% total. Surprisingly, the vaccine combination in the first dose was only at half strength, with 90% being protected from COVID-19 in the trial. In contrast, the combination of two full-dose shots led to just a 62% efficacy. There are also other potential risk factors that we may only realize after we've implemented such a vaccine at such a scale as we plan to do with this one. But years of science have demonstrated the methods that we are working with or utilized to pull this off can be very precise. And so this seems to be an instance where we can make good predictions to effectiveness, but also have a good understanding of what the risks are. But still, for any new emerging science, a global scale test is probably the fastest way to get new data to advance that particular field. So what will become possible after we've reviewed the data after administering this to much of the world's population should be able to test a number of hypotheses and push this particular branch of medical science even farther than it is today. In my essay, I describe a 4-part process of becoming post-human by 2050. The first step was a development platform for introducing software directly into the human brain like Neuralink. The second step was building enough knowledge into genetic medicine to be able to quickly create new genetic medicines on the fly. I didn't think that we would really get there until about 2030, but this is a major step towards reaching that point. And to think we will hit that in 2021 gives me big hopes for 2025. The third step was something that was mentioned in the video, and that would be nanomachines.
The deal is to store your biometric information, because this vaccine will have nanoparticles, nanocrystalline particles that are actually little robots, and they like little antennas, and they will have the ability to take your biometric data, not only your vaccine record, but your breathing, your heart rate, your activities, sexual activities, drugs that you're taking, where you travel, all of that, and then take that data and store it in the cloud.
To describe where science currently is on nanomachines is to say that we can build them with all the technical complexity of a hammer, whereas what she and I are both imagining would be a lot more like a cell phone or even a factory. I didn't predict that we would be able to make any headway into this until at least 2030 or 2035, and that's still looking like a good estimate even where we are today. But eventually I would like to start seeing nanomachines, like what she's proposing, be utilized to gain a complete and holistic understanding of the body's health, and in my mind, they would be transmitting that data to a central source within the body. Since this is happening within my hypothesized system, that central source is just a neural implant, so you don't need much of an antenna to be able to reach that. But in her data theft hypothesis, nanomachines have to transmit a good bit farther to at least reach your cell phone or a cell tower. That's placing a lot more of the design emphasis on the antenna, meaning that the overall product wouldn't be able to develop further in other ways. If its only purpose would be a spying technology, this would make sense, but it's not going to work for the more comprehensive plan that I have in mind for it. But it's also a little bit redundant to try to develop such an advanced technology to do something that's already done very effectively today by social media and cell phones, and even many of our apps. I have to hand it to her, it does make me realize that if we had a system like this implanted into our bodies, we would want to take very good care of how our data is being managed. But if this is the concern, we don't really have to look forward to some far future technology to rob us of all our data points. That technology is already here, and we've adopted it into our lives wholeheartedly. For example, Amazon now has wearable technology that, among doing most everything that she described here, also measures your tone and word usage during conversations to determine your mood, a feature which you can perform 24 hours a day. I would also guess it probably knows when you've had orgasms too, if that's something you're concerned about. The fourth step in my plan was to make a biological organ that could coordinate with all of the previous systems in order to manufacture genetic medicine on the fly for whatever condition or problem the nanomachines detect within the body. With the 4 steps in place, as well as technology to keep our telomeres from degrading, a process that often leads to genetic imperfections that accumulate as the aging process, we would be basically immune to everything but the most violent causes of death. Maybe this seems far-fetched, and I do remind you that it's only an essay or a hypothesis. But this is a bright future that I dream of for us, and through these technologies, that bright future may be possible. And given our current progress exceeding even my earliest expectations, maybe we will get there even faster than I was predicting. Or maybe there will be some unseen complications that slows us down the road. But as far as fantastic ideas go, believing that I might have been born into the first generations of humans to potentially achieve something close to immortality, I find this to be a much more fascinating hypothesis than the bullshit that this woman is peddling. But since neither of these hypotheses have been borne out by science, they're still basically just memes. In the final episode of this series, I'm going to talk about hacking the brain in mimetic warfare. So stick around because we're finally about to reach that dramatic conclusion. Just one more thing before I roll credits on this. I recently became aware of the No Comrades Under 1K sub, and I would just like to throw up on the screen some comrades that I'm subscribed to that have not yet reached 1,000 subs, but I really feel like they deserve it. So check these channels out. like their videos, give them a subscription, do what you can to help them out, share them on Facebook, whatever social media platforms you happen to be on, and let's try to build a stronger community together. I'm Jackie Fox, and my content will always be ad-free because I'm eschewing corporate donations to the channel. I just ask that if you can donate a little bit of money on Patreon like these fine, foxy folks, or if you want to make a one-time donation, you can donate on Coffee. If you're looking for another way to support the channel, I'm also making Fox hats with my logo on them. They are currently in the design phase, and I'm willing to allow people to ask for customized hats. Prices may vary depending on the cost of labor to manufacture them, because I want to make sure that my workers are paid fairly.